Hey everybody, welcome to Tony T's Tune Talk, available here at the Port Washington Public Library YouTube channel. I'm your host, Tony Traguardo, and I'm ready to talk tunes. Today's episode, we will focus on Canada, our friends to the north that have been the breeding ground of some amazing music over the years, and some of the best of it can be found at your local library. Now, in a short video, I'm not going to be able to do more than skim the surface of the vast contributions that Canadians have made to popular music, so this might end up being one of a number of segments about this topic. But here goes. This time around, I'll focus on a few of the artists that became famous in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, though we often think of this first gentleman as an icon of 1960s California music, Neil Percival Young was actually born in Toronto, Canada, and raised in Toronto and Winnipeg, Manitoba. After having survived a bout with polio in his youth, something that he shared with another major Canadian artist, Joni Mitchell, Neil got into music in his teens and formed a band called the Squires. Now, he might have gotten into the public eye as a member of Rick James's band. Yes, that Rick James. But Neil was the guitarist in Rick's group, the Minor Birds, and Rick went and got himself busted for being AWOL from the Army Reserves, and so Neil was out on his own. Now, Neil had met and befriended a fine guitar player from California named Stephen Stills while Stills was visiting Canada. So, with an invitation from his new friend to come by and visit anytime you like, and with nothing to lose, Neil Young and his fellow Minor Bird Bruce Palmer headed south into the U.S., L.A. to be exact, with the intention of finding Stephen. The two actually ended up meeting Stephen and guitarist Richie Furay by pure coincidence at a busy intersection in LA, and thus the legendary Buffalo Springfield was born. Now, any of the discs from that group's box set or any of their individual albums make for a great listen. Now, when the Springfield split up, Neil began his solo career, and by 1970 he was also moonlighting as the sometimes Y in CSNY, the acronym for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And of course, he was working solo. And two shining examples of Neil's incredible solo work are 1972's Harvest, which includes the hit songs Old Man and Heart of Gold, and the follow-up sequel from 1992, Harvest Moon, which, aside from the gorgeous title track, which was something of a hit single, also contains compositions like From Hank to Hendrix. Really lovely stuff. Now, there's also an album called Silver and Gold, which is in the acoustic vein, that should not be missed. And you can catch an amazing solo live performance by Neil from 1971 on the Live at Massey Hall CD. Now, of course, with Neil Young, there's also the crunchy, edgy side of Neil that comes out in much of his work with the band Crazy Horse. And some highlights from that side of Neil's career include their first album together, Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, and 1994's grunge-inspired Sleeps with Angels, which features the epic Change Your Mind. There's also a highly underrated Crazy Horse album, in my opinion, 1987's Life, which includes some of the most powerful, poignant, political lyrics of Neil's career, at least up until that point. The more recent Psychedelic Pill, which is a double CD, features Neil's songs being interpreted by an older Crazy Horse. In my opinion, the album reinforces the idea that the Horse is the band that perfected the concept of a brilliant sonic assault. Now, I mentioned Neil's friend Joni Mitchell. She was born Roberta Joan Anderson in Alberta, but raised in Saskatoon. Joni's incredibly poetic songs, her unique contralto voice, and her fascinating guitar tunings made her one of the most revered artists of her generation. She began her career playing folk clubs in Canada in 1964, where she caught the attention of the late Oscar Brand. Oscar was a legendary folk singer and radio host who had his own TV show in Canada, which Joni appeared on. And Oscar would eventually come to the U.S. and host a folk radio show on WNYC in New York for over 30 years. He lived in Great Neck for much of his life and appeared at the Port Washington Library a few times, the final time being January of 2012. Anyway, back to Dear Joni. A chance meeting with David Crosby at a California nightclub resulted in Joni getting a contract with Reprise Records in the U.S. Now, her debut album, Song to a Seagull, has some fine moments, but in my opinion, it's on her second album, Clouds, where her true artistry first begins to shine brightly. Songs like Both Sides Now, Chelsea Morning, Songs to Aging Children, these are classic, beautiful, poetic pieces that make the album a must-listen for any music lover. The closest that Joni Mitchell ever came to a big hit album was her 1974 release Court and Spark, which featured the big hit song Big Yellow Taxi. Now, can we... Much better, thank you. This is one instance where the public got it right, where one of the artist's greatest works actually also earned them the highest praise. Doesn't happen all the time. Anyway, this album was also the first in a series of jazzier efforts by Joni. And there's a great live album from the period called Miles of Isles that captures her reinterpreting in a jazz form some of her classic early songs. Joni's more recent efforts, the ones that are in her lower vocal range, are something of an acquired taste. And while I personally consider 1991's Night Ride Home to be her last truly great LP, there are many fans who find moments of brilliance as late as 2007's Shine. So definitely feel free to explore her whole catalog. No discussion of great Canadian songwriters would be complete without a mention of Ontario's Gordon Lightfoot, a man who Bob Dylan has called one of the greatest songwriters of all time. While his individual album releases range from pure bliss to slightly patchy, the two greatest hits collections, titled Gord's Gold and Gord's Gold 2, collect many of the greatest compositions of a songwriter that Robbie Robertson of the band, a fellow Canadian, called a national treasure. Anyone who had the radio turned on at any time between 1970 and 1975 will easily recognize The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, If You Could Read My Mind, Sundown, but there are also many more gems to be found on these two discs. And you did hear me right. Robbie Robertson, the co-founder of the group The Band, a group that is always mentioned in the same breath with the word Americana, is actually Canadian. Who would have guessed, right? Anyway, speaking of guessing, hailing from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, the Guess Who were one of Canada's most successful exports. They had hit songs like These Eyes, Laughing, American Woman, Share the Land, Clap for the Wolfman, songs that were staples of both AM and FM radio here in the U.S. during the late 60s and early 70s. Now you can grab all of these amazing songs and more on the double CD Anthology collection, but don't be shy about grabbing a few of their catalog album releases to explore them a bit more deeply. I can highly recommend their second U.S. LP, Can't Wait, from 1969, as well as the fantastic and timely Share the Land, a political record, from 1971. That was their first album without their co-founder, Randy Bachman. And yes, it is pronounced Bachman. And I will warn you and admit that there are parts of Canned Wheat that do sound a bit dated. There are some really long jams, like a song called Key, but truly enjoyable and considered progressive in a way at the time. You may also want to check out the expanded CD reissue of the live album Live at the Paramount, which came out in the early 70s. And please follow the post-Guess Who trail and check out some of the really fine solo releases by the group's founders. You can catch Randy Bachman playing like a house on fire during a live set with Bachman Turner Overdrive on the live CD of their King Biscuit Radio Hour concert from 1974. And the emotional vocals, gorgeous piano playing, fine interpretive skills, and one-of-a-kind voice of Burton Cummings is highlighted on his first self-titled solo album from 1976, which also featured the hit single Stand Tall. Now, There is no way you can look at Canadian music without talking about the late Leonard Cohen, who passed away in November of 2016. Leonard Cohen left behind a rich catalog of songs, including Hallelujah, a modern standard that's been covered by over 300 artists worldwide. He released 14 studio albums in his lifetime and then a posthumous release that came out, and each one contains a number of stunning compositions. Here are a few highlights. You see Cohen's first album, Songs of Leonard Cohen, released in 1967. It contains the classic Suzanne, part of a debut that is a clear indicator why many performers would soon consider Cohen to be the most important songwriter since Bob Dylan. The 1988 release, I'm Your Man, is a stellar record from start to finish. On the CD release, the stunning title song is sandwiched in between the brilliant First We Take Manhattan and the much-covered Tower of Song. Cohen's albums are always beautifully arranged, but 1971's Songs of Love and Hate stands out. It features the beautiful famous Blue Raincoat and an orchestra conducted by the late Paul Buckmaster, who you may be familiar with from Elton John's early work. And this record includes some of the greatest arrangements in the artist's catalog. And please treat your ears also to Jennifer Warren's album of Leonard Cohen covers, which is also titled Famous Blue Raincoat. In my opinion, this album collects some of the finest interpretations of Cohen's compositions, and great covers also appear on the CD of the soundtrack to the film I'm Your Man. All just really fine listening. Well, that wraps up this episode of Tony T's Tune Talk. And if you'd like, please make some comments. And if you'd like to make some suggestions for additional episodes, please feel free. Stay tuned. Keep an eye on your library's YouTube channel. And thanks for watching, and have fun listening.